Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a virtual building tour of Leeds Playhouse Theatre, organised by the Leeds Society of Architects and RIBA Yorkshire. We're delighted to have had over 200 of you sign up for tonight's event, so thank you very much to all of you for supporting the LSA, the RIBA and the Playhouse Theatre. Do be aware this event will be recorded. By way of an introduction, I'm Ben Pipkin. I'm the co-president of the Leeds Society of Architects, and I will briefly attempt to introduce the rest of the team helping us today. So from the Playhouse Theatre, we have James Brining, who is the Playhouse's artistic director, who is hopefully on screen now. And if not, we've also got from Page Park Architects, who will be presenting for the majority of tonight. We have Nicola Walls. We have Eamon McGarrigle. Takes a few seconds to flick between each person. There's Eamon, and we also have David Wiley as well. Okay, so thank you very much to the RIBA for supporting us through the local initiative fund to create what will hopefully be a game changer in online building tours, and together with our sponsors help deliver the event free of charge for all of you this evening. As a member of the Creative Industries Council, the RIBA supports a lot of creative industries, and having the Leeds Playhouse as an RIBA Awards Yorkshire shortlisted project for 2020 provided an excellent opportunity to seek how we can support one another locally. A massive thank you to the Playhouse for giving us access to the building over the last few weeks in order to allow for us to capture the 3D scan that will form the main part of the building tour today. By now, of course, you've all probably heard that West Yorkshire will be in Tier 3 at the start of December, which very sadly means that the Playhouse will not be reopening as it originally planned. So grateful to all of you for attending. All we can say is we really hope that you enjoy having a look around the building, and at the point that the Playhouse is able to reopen, we'd really encourage as many of you as possible to go and see it for yourselves. There will be an opportunity later on, which I'll talk you through, to donate more immediately to the Playhouse to help them out through what's a really difficult time. So in terms of technology for tonight, and you can probably see already how we're having to mix a few different things together, we'll be combining a digital Matterport model, which is going to allow us to walk around the building at what's quite an interesting sort of fixed point in time. Obviously, the building is closed for the time being, and you'll see as we walk around that you know, it kind of captures the building at a very specific moment, which is hopefully quite interesting. We've also got presentation slides, and we've got some video footage as well, which we're all broadcasting live over the internet. So what could possibly go wrong? Before we dive into the presentation, there will be an opportunity for an attendee to win a pair of tickets for the Playhouse. We were hoping that would be for a performance of A Christmas Carol on the 8th of December. Unfortunately, that show is not now able to go ahead, which we're gutted about. So that prize is still happening, and we'll come to that later on in the event today. And we'll be able to give a pair of tickets away for an event in the future, subject to availability. I think that's it from me in terms of housekeeping. I would just like to say a couple of additional thank yous. So I'd like to say thank you very much to our sponsors. As well as the RIBA helping us tonight, we've been really lucky to have the event sponsored by a couple of companies that were really instrumental in the project itself. So we've got Darwin Terracotta and Faience, and a company called Vala Cladding, who were the installers. And between them, and working with Page Park Architects, they were able to create the ceramic facade that you see on the new entrance to the building, which has been a really big part of the the sort of rebirth of the building and its new presence to the city. So we're really grateful to Darwin and to Vala for supporting us tonight. I'd also like to say thank you to Cloud9 Photography, who are local and very experienced architectural photographers, and hopefully we're joined by Jonathan and Zarina tonight, who are watching, and as well as photography, they were able to carry out the 3D scan and collect all of the data, which has enabled us to create the model that you'll hopefully be seeing shortly. So yeah, we're really grateful to Cloud9 for supporting us for this event. There are links in the Q&A function of this event that allow you to access the websites of those companies. So please do check them out. There's also a link to donations, but we'll come back to that later. And there's also an opportunity to give feedback at the end of the event as well, which helps us to evaluate how things have gone and hopefully make them better for the future. So I think that's pretty much me for now. So I am delighted to be able to hand over to James Brining, the Artistic Director of the Playhouse, to give us a bit of a client's perspective on the project. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Can you hear me? And see me? Even better. Well, I'll let you decide that. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this brilliant event. I'm not an architect, but having worked closely with Page Park over the last 2 or 3 years, I've got huge respect for what you do, and it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to you a little bit about our own particular project. As Ben said, we're sort of handling the news that we're not allowed to open as early as we hoped to with our Christmas production, but however daunting that is, we are still carrying on, and in the longer term we see a really strong future for the Playhouse, not least because of the way that the building has been developed over this period of time that we'll describe. So I thought I'd maybe just start by giving a bit of context for the Playhouse. I know some people will be joining this event from Leeds, but some people may not. So you may know the theatre well in Leeds, or you may have no idea. But so I'll give you a bit of context. The theatre sort of came into being after some lobbying by a group of people in Leeds who, back in the 60s, thought that Leeds, as a large city in the north, should have a producing theatre. It was quite, in a way, quite unique, really, for not having a producing theatre for the scale of city that it was. That led to the formation of the Leeds Playhouse in 1970 in a temporary premises on the university campus, and sports hall is now a lecture theatre. So that theatre was set up then, and so this is our 50th anniversary year, slightly hampered by COVID, I have to say, but we do have plans to celebrate it as soon as we can, probably towards the end of next spring, summer. There was a kind of lobby for a permanent theatre, despite the sort of creation of the temporary space, and so in 1990 the theatre moved to a part of the city called Quarry Hill, which is just on the edge of the city centre, replacing a massive social housing development, Quarry Hill Flats. I think people say it was the biggest development of its kind in Western Europe. And there's an interesting sub-narrative about this whole thing about knocking down some sort of social housing and replacing it with a theatre. And I think the roots of that, the spirit of what that social housing was meant to be about, was sort of infused a little bit into what the West Yorkshire Playhouse was. They changed their name from Leeds Playhouse to West Yorkshire Playhouse, partly because West Yorkshire Authority gave the final 4.4 million to allow the project to happen. And also there was a sense of this sort of regional ambition for the theatre, so it was serving the whole of West Yorkshire. It included 2 theatre spaces, the Quarry and the Courtyard, and we'll mention them. I'm sure Nicola, and when you go on the tour, you can look out for them. So 2 spaces, one epic, kind of based on the sort of ancient Greek open-air theatre arena, and one a more conventional proscenium arch end-on courtyard space. And as I've mentioned, the social element has always been part of what the Playhouse is about, and these images you can see on the screen, I mean, Princess Anne's in one of them, but the rest of them show kind of the range of different people that participate in the life of the theatre. And I think when Nicola Walls came to talk to us, that was something that hit her really immediately, was how we aren't just a place that puts shows on, we're a place which is a community of lots and lots of different and diverse people. We're funded by the Arts Council of England and by Leeds City Council. The turnover in a typical year is around 12 million. We've got about 150 staff. In a typical year, we employ about 700 freelance artists, And the current sort of COVID pandemic situation has really brought the plight of freelance artists to the fore and how vulnerable those people are. So we are a theatre of scale. We employ a lot of people through the course of the year across a whole range of disciplines. And in the year that we went into the refurb, which is our last full year of being open, we had about 200,000 people in the audience in Leeds, a further, I think, 350,000 seeing our work on tour. We had shows in 4 different continents in that year, in that season, and about 12,000 participants who take part in community and kind of creative activity within the theatre. There are 3 key strands of work that make up the Playhouse. One is what you might expect, takes place on stage. So we put productions on, big, small, touring. So that's the most conventional thing about what we do. We've also got an artist development program, which is called Furnace, and we have a whole range of skills development, not just for emerging or new artists, but also for artists at different levels of the stages of their career. And that artistic development is a really important part of the ecology of what the Playhouse does. And then the third part is our creative engagement program, which is probably the biggest program outside London of its kind. We've got 17 permanent staff working on creative engagement. And there are a number of strands to the creative engagement program. We work with young people in a whole range of contexts. We work with older people. We work in schools and in education contexts, and we also work in communities. We were the first theatre of sanctuary, which means our work with refugees and asylum seekers was recognised by the Refugee Council. So we're really proud to have started the whole notion of being a theatre of sanctuary. It's something which has been picked up and copied by a whole range of different theatres and companies across the UK. We also started relaxed performances, which are performances where the performance is modified for people who have particular access needs or aren't comfortable sitting in a darkened auditorium. And again, relaxed performances are now not just standard in the UK, but also across the world. And we were the first theatre to introduce dementia-friendly performances based on our long-standing work with older people. Our Heydays programme, which has been going since 1990, is the longest continuously running arts programme for older people that we know of in the UK. The reason I mention that is because it's incredibly important to who we are as a Playhouse community. And I always spend more time speaking about that kind of activity than the work on stage, because it's what people expect us to come and see plays. And of course, we love making shows, big and small, but we also love equally the interaction and the development in individuals that happens when people come into a space and work creatively together. And that social drive is as powerful and important an ethic for us as a creative aesthetic drive. And it's the relationship between the two. As an artistic director of 30 years I've been doing this job, the relationship between the two at the Playhouse is really fantastic, and the opportunities are endless, really. So when I came to take over as artistic director, and I'm actually from Leeds, so I do remember the original Leeds Playhouse, and I also remember the West Yorkshire Playhouse opening, and it was a major event for the city at the time. But I do remember feeling that there was a need to address what felt like quite an aging building. I mean, I guess it was 22, 23 years old. I don't know if that's old in building terms, but it felt quite tired. And we were quite frustrated with the building because a lot of the access and kind of the desire to try and make the theatre as open as possible were frustrated. That desire was frustrated by the physical environment that the building as it presented itself. And also, if you know the building, and you'll see an image in a moment which demonstrates what I'm talking about, it felt like we had turned our back on the city. Our entrance faced away from the city centre to the kind of northeastern part of essentially where the bypass cuts through the city. The performance spaces that we had, the courtyard and the quarry, they're brilliant, but they didn't give the opportunities that we wanted to give artists, particularly early on in their careers, the opportunity to work in. They're quite big, intimidating spaces, and we didn't have any performance space. And we were quite ingenious about creating temporary spaces, but we knew that we wanted a space that we could give to for smaller, more intimate performances. So I suppose that's all by way of introduction to why did we feel we needed to go into this refurbishment programme. The notion of turning our back on the city is something that really resonated with me early on in my time. And I think that I said early on, we need to turn back to face the city. And I both meant that in terms of our programme, and I meant it as a metaphor, but I actually literally I realised quite early on that we literally had to turn the theatre around to face the city, because the statement that gives the city is incredibly important. And And I think that's probably where the conversation with Page Park started. And I'll hand over to Nicola in a moment. But it took probably about 3 or 4 years to develop the relationships with the funders, the City Council, the Arts Council, to build a proposition, to build the confidence, I suppose, in the funders. We had 4 objectives, which I think were on the previous slide. Inclusivity, that's making the theatre as accessible as we possibly could, increasing the porosity of the theatre so that it didn't feel like it was turning its back on the city, but actually opening and embracing itself to the city. Nurturing, so that's about enabling us to provide those opportunities to artists to create work in a more secure environment. Resilience was driven by kind of an agenda around the environment, really, upgrading equipment that was out of date or inefficient, but also giving ourselves the opportunity to better capitalise on our bars, our restaurant, and the reasons that people want to come into a building and have a really nice, pleasant time in it. And then identity, and I suppose that's where turning the theatre around and what face we present to the city, it became kind of really, really important. What do we want to say to our city of Leeds? So maybe you can move on to the next slide before I hand over to Nicola. So we obviously met various architects, and what was wonderful about meeting Page Park, and not just Nicola, but Eamon and other colleagues, was such a sort of, what's the word, a really kind of in-depth, they really came and got to know us. They didn't just sort of present us a whole set of ideas and images. They spent time with us, and not just with us who work at the theatre, but people who use the theatre, with audiences, with community participants, and really got under the skin of the theatre. And I think that that really helped the project evolve and develop. And in some respects, it helped the theatre develop its own thinking and its own philosophy at the same time. So I think what we've ended up with is a very kind of coherent, cohesive, physical representation of the ideas of what the Leeds Playhouse represents.
Thank you, James. So I'll pick up from here then, and for those that aren't familiar with Leeds, just give a little bit more context in terms of the urban setting that we find ourselves working in. So you can see from this aerial view here, the Playhouse sitting very proud on the right hand side, and this wedge of land between it and Leeds City College, which was developed simultaneously with the building, both in terms of design development and then implementation. And in fact, the same contractor, BAM, worked on both. And what you can see in the back of this image here is Leeds Quarry House. Now, this was the kind of only delivered element of Terry Farrell's master plan for the Quarry Hill area of Leeds that was developed in the 1980s, and that is the reason why the Playhouse building effectively faced the wrong way to the city, because the entrance was at the top of the hill, so it effectively faced away from the city, anticipating a development that actually was never materialized. So if we could move on to the next slide. So in terms of giving a little bit more context where the Playhouse sits within the city, we can see the Playhouse is in the slightly lighter tone on the right hand side there, but the upper dashed arrow there is a very key arterial route, an axial route across the city centre from east to west, off which there are some really iconic major public buildings, including Leeds Town Hall, the Art Gallery, the Henry Moore Institute. And we can see how that then kind of, if you projected that line across the page, you would culminate on the centre line of Quarry House. And so the Playhouse kind of sat as part of that family. We can see the kind of curved road in front. That is effectively almost like an inner city bypass, St. Peter's Street, that also doesn't help in terms of the Playhouse feeling quite disconnected from the city. As we move on, we can see the building that we were presented with. This was the public face to the theatre. You had to cross over a multi-lane road. You saw the roller shutter doors that were serviced, the service areas, the bars and the kitchen. You then had to find your way up the side of the building on the right hand side. The building was brickwork. It had very much in the style of the Leeds look, which is style that you see across the city, but it covers a myriad of building types, and the only clue that you have that you're actually approaching a theatre is the fly tower that sits above you. So yeah, we really felt obviously we had to do something with the image of the theatre. So if you could move on. So what struck us was, in many ways, the original design by Ian Appleton Partnership was very, very clever. They'd used the topography of Quarry Hill and the fact that they entered at the top to really disguise the bulk and the mass of the Quarry Theatre, the largest theatre space. But what that did lead to was a multi-level building that was very difficult and seemed to be always ending in dead ends. Now, during the competitive process, I actually visited the building and I booked myself to see a show on the Friday evening, and I took a backstage tour on the Saturday, and that gave me a really good insight into what Leeds Playhouse was all about. But it also highlighted to me the real challenges of the building, watching everybody struggle into the back of the Quarry Theatre at the very top of a very steep tiered seating bank. And then when I was seated, I looked across and I saw a wheelchair user and their companion sitting in splendid isolation in the very periphery of this fan-shaped seating bank. And I just thought, well, goodness, theatre's about that shared experience, and those people are having a very different experience than I am. And so I kind of left determined that we would find a way to kind of explode this building and carve a route through that opened up the middle of the building, which is the red line on this diagram here, so that people could enter the quarry in a democratic way, open to everybody, and you would be halfway up the seating bank. If you could move on. So in terms of the context as it now is, we can see toned in gold there, the kind of very modest footprint of the new extension that sits and faces the city centre, but actually the project became a lot more. We really expanded the brief as we got to know Leeds Playhouse as an organisation and understand the building. So you can see here immediately to the north, the Playhouse Gardens and the Leeds City College sitting to the north of that. And then there's a major development happening by Caddick Development between the Playhouse and Quarry House on the right hand side, so that this whole area is being regenerated. If you could move on. So just to give help you orientate yourself as before we go into the virtual tour, the building is quite complicated because of the levels and the topography, and hopefully it now kind of entices people to explore. What we can see is the new entrance at the bottom of the slide off St Peter's Street, and within that new extension we now have a large passenger lift and a new stair that serves all the levels, because before there was only one small kind of easily accessible passenger lift. We now were able to manipulate the plan as well to get a level direct access that was covered into the barber studio, which is a significant space in the building and the main rehearsal room that they have. What's coloured in toned up in gold towards the centre of the slide is some of the support accommodation then for the Bramall rock void, and this is this new intimate small scale studio that we created using the undercroft of the existing entrance of Playhouse Square. And here we can see some shots pre-development. So the Bramall family very kindly supported the development of this space, but you can literally see the rock head, the very rough and ready brickwork, and then the raw concrete soffit. And what we were really, really keen to do was to keep that as found aesthetic and direct contrast to the aesthetic of the other key spaces in the building. Move on. So the next level up is where we made the fundamental changes, and we really drove and carved out this new route that linked back to the new extension, which is 05 on this EXO, and then leads ultimately up to the former entrance of Playhouse Square, which is 01 on that diagram. What we were able to do was create a new box office, an interval bar, which is just by 04, which is now literally the heart of the building, and to open up the north elevation of the building so that we could get better connections with this new external landscape space. But most importantly, what this enabled us to do was create new connections directly into the Quarry Theatre, which is 06, and the Courtyard Theatre, 07. If you can move on. So in terms of the plan, then the Quarry Theatre on the right hand side there, what we've toned up there are the wheelchair positions, which formerly were on the very periphery of this fan shape, and now you can feel much more embedded in the heart of the audience. And in order to get to these positions, we formed two new ways in, two new vomitory for entrances. And what the fundamental difference that's now made, I think, to people is that they arrive on this space and they immediately engage with the stage. There's an immediate connection there, whereas before you kind of arrived in the space and you were just standing at the top of these steep stairs, kind of being really worried about your footings. We opened up the theatre at the back as well so that we could compensate for the loss of seats further forward and create some better wheelchair positions there. And the Courtyard Theatre, that wasn't in the original brief when the original feasibility study was done, but again the Playhouse were very keen to increase seating capacity by removing the retractable seating bank that you see in the top diagram there, and then using the recess at the back of that space that the seating retracted into to create this shallow fixed rake, and we could get an extra 3 rows of seats at the back. Thank you. If we could move on. And so then we move up a level. So from the kind of reconfigured entrance of Playhouse Square, we then move up half a level to the principal foyer area. Now, we didn't fundamentally change that too much. We refurbished the bar and the restaurant and the kitchen areas. But what we have been able to do is allow that then to expand into the new entrance extension. And by the reconfigurations around either side of the entrance of Playhouse Square, we've been able to put in a lot more public toilets and also a new hospitality space, the Brook Room. Then if we move up finally to the top floor, there at the very top of the new extension, we created yet another hospitality space which has fantastic views out across the city and connects with the city. And then we cut a sneaky little corridor through the slated mansard roof to create a direct link then from the new foyer and the new lift and stair through to the toned area in the centre of that image, which is the Congreve Room. Now that was formerly a hospitality space, but in order to get to that you had to go through a secured access door. So now you can reach that as part of the kind of public foyer system. Thank you. So the most kind of, I suppose, the most striking element of this redevelopment in many ways is, of course, the ceramic facade, and that is very, very rooted in Leeds, and deliberately so. When we started visiting the city and getting to know it better, we realised just how many fine buildings around the city use ceramics and faience. We also discovered through our research that not too far from the site of the Playhouse, there was the Bermontoff's pottery that produced this wildly exuberant, colourful pottery that you can see in that image there, and then exported that across the world. And I kind of think there's something really nice about how a lot of the work the Playhouse develop on stage and things feels quite local, but it's quite universal in theme, and again is very easy to kind of tour both nationally and internationally. But being able to use ceramics enabled us to kind of exploit the plasticity of the material, and so we looked to develop a 3-dimensional tiled module that harked back to the original geometries of the building. If we could move on. And then, of course, the Leeds Playhouse are professional storytellers, so they were kept pushing to say, well, what's the narrative behind these? And it so happens that we have 4 ceramic panels and there are 4 key performance spaces in the building. And we use colour to help with the orientation around the building. But the black tiles that you see there, they symbolise an actor standing at the edge of the stage in the footlights looking out at his audience. And so the colours are brightest at the bottom and recede into darkness as you move up the panels. And in terms of crafting this elevation, it was a very collaborative and iterative process, and the Leeds Playhouse were very heavily involved in this, particularly around colour choices. And we can see James's colleague, the exec director, Robin Hawkes, in that central image, poring over the unfired ceramic modules. And we worked very, very closely as well with our sponsor events tonight, Darwin and Vala, to develop the support and fixing systems. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleagues Eamon McGarrigle and David Wiley, who are going to take us, hopefully, on a virtual tour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for setting the scene there. So just while we're loading the model up, you've got me for a couple of minutes again, I'm afraid. So just to explain what we did in order to create this model. So it's a technology. The model is called a Matterport model. In order to create that, Cloud9, the team went in and placed cameras, 360-degree cameras, every 2 or 3 meters through the space. Now, obviously, you've got an understanding by now of the scale and of the complexity of the building. So to record that was, it was certainly quite ambitious for us, given that we were coordinating it around rehearsals that were going on at the time, making sure that we got access to various different spaces at different times of the day. So hats off to the guys at Cloud9, and thank you very much to the Playhouse for accommodating us and letting us do this at what is obviously a really challenging time with restrictions around COVID, etc. So once all of that 360-degree footage is taken, it's combined surprisingly quickly into a 3-dimensional model. Now, this is a technology that was developed, partly for real estate and to allow for surveys of buildings and to allow teams to look at sort of site progress or to sort of, record conditions of things without having to actually go and visit the building. So it was a technology that when we thought about the idea of putting on a virtual building tour, this kind of very naturally came up as an idea. It is quite cutting edge stuff. And what I would say is that because of the sort of multi-level character of this building, as you've just seen from some of the axos there, we are on the limit of what that technology can do. So I'm really proud that this model has come together in the way that we intended. So we're going to move through it in a sort of series of key routes, just bear with us, please, as hopefully everything goes smoothly. So thanks very much, and I'll hand back to Paige Park.
We start at the beginning. Our new extension faces the approach from the city centre along George Street and Eastgate, and aligns with a new pedestrian crossing across St Peter Street. It obscures that very defensive low-slung tiled roofscape, which previously greeted the approach. Hopefully there's no doubt that you're approaching a civic building with our new extension. The ceramic panels are set between deep precast concrete piers, alternating between tall strips of curtain wall glazing, which give passers-by and motorists a glimpse into the life of the theatre inside. Each panel represents a theatre, with each assigned a distinct colour scheme, and you'll notice when we walk through the building that we have also used these colours internally to help with the wayfinding and to identify each performance space. Panels are also lit from below, which you should see later on in one of our supporting slides. A final flourish is that the extension is crowned in large individual illuminated letters spelling Playhouse, each sitting atop one of the precast piers. This was fairly serendipitous that the numbers of letters aligned with the number of piers, as our design for the facade preceded the idea of placing the building signage at the top of the building. And the signage itself is reminiscent of the original Leeds Playhouse building on Leeds campus, University campus. And for us, it also further connects the new extension to an earlier and more recognisable language of theatre. So if we go closer and come in through the front door, we arrive in the Irwin Mitchell foyer on level 0. Here we have the front room cafe, which anchors the entrance on St Peter Street and animates the building at ground street level. We've used a fairly simple palette of robust materials here, mainly timber and painted metal. And this extends up through the extension into the connecting link. For the extension, we had to tie into the existing building levels. And as the existing floor-to-floor levels were quite constricted at 3 metres, this proved quite a challenge for head heights when we had to accommodate supporting steelwork and building services. So we developed a bespoke slatted plywood ceiling for the extension and connecting link, and the rhythm and tactility of this we think helps with relieving low ceiling heights whilst also concealing and providing access to the services and a void above. Finishes for the cafe itself, we painted the timber panels the same colour as external metal work, keep a quite consistent and muted palette of colours and materials. I think Nicola alluded to the fact that the extension is quite small footprint itself, but we try to make this work quite hard. If you pan up, you can see the kind of galleried areas are tiered, advancing towards external wall as you ascend through the building. And you can see the main kind of direct stair on the right, which can quite quickly connect you to upper levels. But if we continue left towards the kind of feature stair leading up to the fundamental area of change, and if we kind of pan to the left, you can see this green wall. This leads to the barber corridor, which gives us the direct access at that level to the barber studio. Again, the green there is directly related to the colour scheme used on the external panels. So if we advance up the stairs, before we continue along the kind of new carved route through the building, if we can double back on ourselves, just have a wee look at the cafe mezzanine. It should be quite slow, but this area obviously the scan was taken at time during COVID, so it's quite empty at the moment, but during normal times this is really well used by visitors and staff alike. It's a cafe mezzanine, so we can look back down into the main cafe space, and it's quite well used for lunchtime, sitting, working, and I think in the far corner you can see some children's toys. So we pan back round, David, we can continue to the main route. So continue along the area of fundamental change, which is a new kind of link through, and you can see on the right hand side we've got the similar palette of the timber slatted materials, which kind of define the side which faces the theatres. You can see there on the left we've got part of our funders wall, which is where individual tiles could be bought, and these are kind of follow the same geometric pattern that we employed on the facade panels themselves. So keep going, and you can catch a glimpse there further ahead in that aperture, which leads directly up onto Playhouse Square. So basically our new extension connects right through up onto the link, right through to the previous entrance of Playhouse Square, which again sort of assists the legibility, which we thought was key for making the building ultimately more accessible and kind of understandable. So we're now right at the heart of the building. You can see directly ahead the box office area. The box office counter, we kind of envisaged this as this quite sinuous element that we use round to form a bar, the terrace bar, which in itself connects to the outdoor area on Playhouse Gardens. In normal times, this was used for spill-out seating and potential performances. It's well set up with supporting services to allow that. You can see on your right here, we've got one of our entrances into the Quarry Theatre. It's worth discussing here the colours. Also, we've picked these up from the ceramic panels to the exterior. We've got a series of gradated colours which kind of lead you through and a subtle change in tones from lighter to darker as you move through from the door to the lobby and into the kind of new vomitory that we've created at the mid-tier level. If we continue straight ahead, you can now see on the right the 4 wheelchair positions which embed the the wheelchair users right in the heart of the performance area. We pan round, in terms of the character of the space, in terms of what we ascribed to the quarry of theatre space, we went for a more richer, more opulent choice of materials and colour, giving a more traditional feel. For the reconfiguration of this area, we worked quite closely with our theatre consultant, Charcoal Blue, just to maintain sight lines, ensure that these were maintained. We had to move forward and move up the perimeter seating rows. So from here we can probably jump back to the box office area. And from here, if we can pan round to the right, David, you can kind of get a glimpse back through. Okay, right. Okay, if we can head on out to kind of past the terrace bar out onto the new space created on Playhouse Gardens. Again, you can see Leeds City College directly ahead, and you can kind of see the kind of direct continuation of that route through. And in normal times, this area would be quite well populated by students from the college and visitors to the Playhouse. So imagine, if you will, a nice sunny day, we could be sitting out here after performance. This landscape wedge, also kind of supports the sustainability aims of the place too. Quite a nicely landscaped area, which supports the biodiversity. So if we can go back in. So we can, sorry, worth mentioning too here, for our intervention, we kind of employ the same palette of materials, the painted metal facade panels. So if we come back in, so again, there's a thickness to the kind of the walls on our carved route through, which can see the surfaces and enable us to create banquette seating, for spill out when performances finish. Up to the left, you can see our connection onto the mid-level, or the level of Playhouse Square entrance. On the direct right here, also toilets, very important in the theatre building. We reconfigured these generally to kind of create a better balance of provision across all the levels. And we were also, during the course of the works, enabled to secure the commission to develop the wayfinding strategy for the Playhouse. So we were able to embed our kind of motifs and colour scheme into the symbols and lettering for both the signage and the toilets. Okay. So if we head further on to Courtyard Theatre, you can see again employing the colour schemes. So if we go into the Courtyard Theatre, again, this is the blue. The blue colour scheme here, we kind of employed a more industrial aesthetic, a cooler aesthetic, and this is inspired by existing steelwork. From here, joy of the model, we can perhaps jump onto the stage. From here, if we can jump onto the stage, we'll pan right round, and we can have a look at our kind of major interventions to the space. As Nicola alluded to, we kind of removed the retractable seating and dug down into the existing floor level to create a new rake, new seating rake, which enabled an extra 3 rows of seating. Okay, so again, new seating and new paintwork to the existing metalwork. So from here, we can jump to the Bramall rock void, or actually we'll jump back out into the level 3, or the main level. We can down the set of existing stairs. Again, we just painted these black to kind of define our route. And down to 0 level. This is at the same level of Playhouse or St. Peter Street. Previously in the existing building, this only served the stalls level of the courtyard. This would have been an existing wall, which we've now carved a void through to enable entrance into the Bramall rock void space. And this is our new space that we carved out of a former basement void below the original entrance. On your right, you can perhaps get a glimpse of the rock where the name comes from. So, and this is essentially a found space, and we were quite keen to keep the raw aesthetic, and we achieved this by just basically sealing the brickwork and then exposing the surfaces. It's got a distinct character, this space, compared to the other performance spaces. It's fairly intimate, 100-seat venue, perfect for small-scale productions. Fairly flexible space, which can support the Playhouse Creative Engagement Programme, which supports that nurturing idea that was part of the briefing process at the early stage. So from here, we can perhaps jump back to level 1, Playhouse Square. Or level 1, sorry, the main level. Okay, so here we can pivot round, we can continue our route from the mid-tier. So again, quite a bit of banquet seating, and so we continue up the stairs onto Playhouse Square level, and this was originally the existing entrance, and if we pivot right back round, so stairs on the right, or immediately to the right and the left, these are symmetrical stairs which we carved into the existing building. So the right-hand stair that kind of leads directly down to the extension on St. Peter Street. And if we can pan up, it's an existing glazed cupola roof light with an exposed concrete ring beam, which retains the memory of the existing West Yorkshire Playhouse name. And we thought was important to keep, kind of build on that historical development of the building. And this would be generally the level you would have arrived at, and still the level you'll arrive at if you come to the Playhouse by car or coach, as that's where the main parking area is. So we can nip outside. Yeah. So you can see Leeds City College building there to your left. If we pan right round, we can look at our intervention. So again, we use this consistent palette of materials, which is a language that ties the intervention, the existing fabric, and the new extension, ties this all together. Our main works here was to centralize the main entrance, so keep this access consistent. If you pan left a bit further, David, you can get a glimpse of Quarry House in the background and the ongoing character development. So if we can pan back and we can head back into the building. So if we could ascend our new set of additional stairs up to the half level, onto level 2. So if you pan left, it's worth kind of mentioning that we still retained existing access at the upper level to the Quarry Theatre, although we reconfigured the doors and the openings to because we had to get rid of the lobby to increase the seating count in the theatre. But we've used the same colours again, so it's quite clear that there's still an entrance at that level to the quarry. Existing bar, we as part of our works, we replaced the fairly tired bar and restaurant servery, which is further along. No real fundamental other changes to this area apart from repainting the area and the window frames. Although if we go further in, we can pivot back and have a look at the new Brook Room Hospitality area, which replaces an existing hospitality room on the lower level, which we lost due to the fairly fundamental reconfiguration of that level. Okay, and if we pivot back again, we can continue on towards our extension. So main intervention here was to kind of draw our new floor plan into the existing floor plan into the extension area, as this better connects level 2 to cafe and foyer levels below. And you can kind of see in the distance here, this wall that we're approaching would have been the existing facade, which we've opened up to enable us to connect the floor plate through. So if we get a bit closer, you can kind of start to look down into the cafe foyer area below. So this was a fundamental move again to unlock the kind of stratified nature of the existing levels in the previous building. And you can look, you kind of forward into the corner as well, you can then kind of start to get further glimpses up to the new room we created at the upper level, the city room. And again, you can look back to the existing building and the Playhouse Gardens landscape wedge. So from here, we could probably just jump up to the upper level. the top of the new extension. You start to see in plan we've created this sneaky corridor through which connects the new extension to the existing building. Helped us to rationalise the public side of the building and connect it to the extension. So we could head on down and have a little look at the reconfigured western room. So on your left, these are existing windows which look into the restaurant area, and on the right you get a glimpse into the back of house areas and the offices and the supporting function of the playhouse. So again, no fundamental works to the western room. If we can pivot back and head back to the extension. So we can see, yeah, on your left, pass by some meeting rooms, tea prep. On your right, you can get a glimpse again down into the restaurant. So again, we approach the new, and the creation of this room is very important. This new hospitality room, it kind of supports the resilience that was required from the by the playhouse for long-term financial stability. I think the city room is quite aptly named because of its views out back to Leeds City, and some great views created here at the top of the extension. Obviously disappointing that we couldn't conduct this tour in person, although we've got further slides and videos which should show these spaces in a little bit more animated fashion. Again, this room itself is quite flexible, used for many functions, from boardroom meetings to hospitality functions and even small-scale performances. So after this, we'll share some more images and a video to kind of give you a better idea of how this building functioned before shutdown.
Hello, me again. We're just going to transition back into some more slides now. A massive thank you guys for that. That was absolutely brilliant. I think that went quite well, didn't it? So thanks for showing us around. We're just going to move through into, and as you saw from the video there, just a bit of a look at kind of post-occupation, which is something that we really should be making more of as architects, those of us that aren't already, and just a bit of an understanding of the impact that the changes that Page Park have made to the Playhouse, what impact that's had on the theatre now and hopefully moving forward. So I'm just going to hand back to the guys at Page Park for that.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? I'm just going to share some photos. We've obviously seen 2D drawings today and a virtual tour of the building, sadly without any people, but I'm just going to give you a few photographs through the different spaces which were taken by our photographer Jim Stevenson. This is the Level Zero cafe which we went to in the tour, and as my colleagues described, it's been a wonderful space for all parts of Leeds to come together. Anytime I've spent time in this space, there's people coming in off the street. It's the first time Leeds Playhouse have had an actual cafe that kind of serves takeaway cakes, coffee and stuff. So it's given them a new part of their sort of brand, I guess, and kind of improved their financial resilience. You can see here there's different types of spaces from all the different mezzanines, which really give a great kind of atmosphere and buzz to this place. And I know the staff have been using it very heavily as well. This is the Bramall rock void. You might not recognise it from the drawings and the kind of empty space, but as you can see, it's such a dynamic space when it's full of 100 people. It really gives a really intimate place for Leeds Playhouse to perform in, and something that they've not had before. As James mentioned at the start, their funders programme used this space very heavily, and they use it to kind of promote their kind of own creative talent and stuff. So a great photo here of a kind of performance in use. These are the two theatre spaces which we visited. The Quarry Theatre on the left-hand side. You can see people coming in and out of the new dormitories with the wheelchair positions in use. And really that sort of warm tone that's been developed through the kind of maroon seating and the kind of timber framework. It's worth probably pointing out, if anybody's not been to the Playhouse before, this was redeveloped. Both of these spaces that are quite dark, cold, blue tone to it, and it's amazing on the right hand side one, when we painted it all grey, what a lick of paint can do. I think everybody was like, why did we not do that sooner? And it really does show that kind of warming that up and kind of taking a new approach to the aesthetics throughout has really made a huge difference to what was both original spaces. The level 1 hospitality space, the existing restaurants used extremely heavily for the Heydays programme, which James talked about earlier. You can see that in use here. Normally this is buzzing with people and creates a kind of really great atmosphere in the kind of central part of the building. The two images on the right, the top one is the new bar in use, and the bottom one, this kind of cafe mezzanine on the upper level, which gives a quieter space for people to sit and kind of spill out space from the restaurant. These are just some shots from the level 1 route. As described, this is the kind of key route where you would come probably when you arrive for the show. The top image shows people arriving at the box office and the bar, mingling outside the Quarry Theatre, the Courtyard Theatre and the Rock Void. All theatres are kind of accessed off this main route. But it also gives, as you can see in the bottom space, just a moment to pause and to actually just sit and enjoy it when it's a bit quieter. The right hand image is a lovely photograph just showing the links from the original entrance, both down the stairs back to the route that you can see on the left, but then also up the stairs to the kind of level 2 hospitality spaces. These are some shots of Playhouse Gardens, a kind of exterior image. We worked really heavily with Reform Landscape, who are the landscape architects for Playhouse Gardens. Really collaborative kind of process to kind of tie in finishes and materials, and that's really kind of a part of the city now that Leeds can really be proud of. And anytime we've been down there in the kind of summer and stuff, seems to be very busy with the kind of college students and just people coming to use it as a park. Playhouse Square entrance on the right hand side, as Amy described, centralised and kind of using this kind of theatre motif of the kind of lights to add a bit of drama to that kind of reconfigured entrance. And then something that we're particularly kind of passionate about in Page Park is really applying the extra layer of storytelling to the project. We were commissioned on a separate appointment to do the signage and wayfinding, and this is a kind of example of some of the stuff that we produced. On the right hand side, you can see the directories where we picked up in the tile motif to really kind of guide people kind of through the different levels. That was also applied to the WC signage, again, the kind of angular motif of the tiles. And then, as Eamon described at the start, using the colours to navigate people through what is quite a complex building, but using colour and signage to get people around and to the various theatres. You can see a couple of these signage elements installed on the timber panelling, and it's something that I think brings the whole kind of design together rather than being applied by someone else after we've left. I'm going to hand back out now to Nicola, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the kind of processes at the end.
Thanks, David. So what we see here now is the kind of archetypal view of the theatre at dusk, all lit up, proudly illuminated, enticing and luring people in to come and explore. And I think, you know, the ceramic facade and those illuminated letters now give the Playhouse undoubtedly a facade that reflects the creativity, the dynamism and the energy that they have as an organisation. But I think if we just flick forward, maybe onto the next one. Yeah, I think what the extension has done clearly has reorientated the building and drawn those connections to the wider city. And I find this image personally exceptionally poignant given the times that we're going through. You'll see on the side of the building there, local band Chumbawamga's lyrics of Tub Thumping. This was a light installation that was installed for Leeds Light Night in 2019. It's been kept up, and I think it's very, very apt for these kind of challenging times that we're all living through at the minute, and particularly true for the theatre sector. But just to finish on some kind of positives, firstly, in terms of sustainability, well, the most sustainable thing that we can do is to retrofit and refurbish an existing building. We have made significant savings in the carbon footprint of the building by doing the usual water saving appliances, LED light fittings, etc. But the biggest impact in many ways was connecting the building to the citywide district heating system. There are some audience stats there which kind of speak for themselves, and I'll invite James to maybe say a little bit more about that in a minute, but really I just wanted to finish on the quote that's at the top of this slide, which links right back, I think, to what our ambition was collectively with the client team and our design team collaborators, was to open this building up and really democratize theatre. And I was absolutely delighted to kind of see this put up on social media and things by a local BBC correspondent. And I thought, okay, that's good, job done. So I don't know, James, whether you would like to say anything about how the buildings performed briefly since reopening and before you had to close again, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can just briefly say, I mean, we decided that we wanted to hold an event, a kind of an open event, and that's what that first number refers to. We had a brilliant weekend where a whole host of people came in, some of whom had used the Playhouse previously and wanted to be, see what had happened. We also welcomed in loads of people who'd never been to the Playhouse, and it was a great opportunity to sort of communicate the message about what the Playhouse is about and for, and people were almost universally really impressed with the job and excited about the new opportunities it afforded. That figure of 86,500 tickets, I mean, that was for our basic 2 or 3, I think it was 3 months of being open, and we'd got a season of work planned from March through to July, which would have more than doubled that number. We'd have been getting 170,000 people, 180,000 people in the course of our first year, which was excellent. But of course, the pandemic interrupted that, and we had to close the doors. The reaction from people who have particular access needs was incredibly positive. I remember speaking at an event with one of our sponsors, Owen Mitchell, who are our access partner, and a person whose child is a wheelchair user and who'd had some really unpleasant experiences in West End theatres. And she came and just spoke incredibly powerfully and movingly about why this redevelopment has been so fantastic for her and her family, because it's just made it possible to be part of the audience in a much more inclusive way than had been the case previously, and was the case in most more traditional theatres. So I think across the board, everybody who uses the Playhouse and has used the Playhouse saw this redevelopment as a brilliant step forward and a great opportunity. And as I've said, even though we are prevented from being open as of today, our hopes are really high that in 5-6 months' time, we'll be able to really build on all of the fantastic work that's been done, led by Page Park and everybody else who's worked on the redevelopment, to really capitalise on this fantastic opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Back to me, I hope, at this stage. Yeah. Great stuff, thank you. Well, I can't say thank you enough, really, to everybody, James, David, Eamon, Nicola, just for giving us a really fantastic insight into the building. I thought technically that worked really well, and thank you to all of you for presenting your side of the story. So a couple of things then, before we go into a brief Q&A, and I can see there've been questions coming in on the Q&A function of the event, which is great. Thank you very much for those. Before we go into that, we're hoping to make the model more widely available online after the event, so that you're able to have a look around yourself, really, and just kind of get your bearings for a second time. So hopefully we can do that. The event is being recorded, as I mentioned at the beginning, and we're hoping through the RIBA that we can make that available online so that anybody that wasn't able to attend is able to watch, or if you are here, then you're able to watch it again. So clearly it's a really tricky time for a lot of people. In particular, as you can imagine, everybody behind the Playhouse. You know, the majority of us here, I think, on the call were able to get the news today about the tier system, and although it obviously has personal impacts in many ways for lots of different people, a lot of us are able to carry on with our jobs as we've been doing over the last few months, and clearly for the Playhouse that just isn't the case, and it could be a little while before things get back to normal. So there's a couple of ways that that you can support the Playhouse. Of course, when things are back up and running, please go and experience the space for yourself. Go and get a ticket. Go and see performances, and you know, enjoy everything that's been done to make the building what it is now. If you're able to support in the short term, then there's a couple of ways you can do that. So there's a web link hopefully on the screen now, which is leedsplayhouse.org.uk/support-us. That will allow you to make a one-off donation, or you can do it more routinely as well, I think, if you like. Alternatively, you can text. So you text Leeds Playhouse, which is one word, followed by a space, and then the amount that you would like to donate, and you text that to 70085. So for instance, £20, you'd text Leeds Playhouse space 20. For £50, you'd text Leeds Playhouse space 50. The way that I would look at it is that if this was a physical tour, if we'd been able to go around the building, obviously there'd have been there'd have been costs incurred for train travel or for parking, etc., etc. And for those of us that have been able to access the building from home, obviously that's been brought to you free of charge, and we're really grateful to the RIBA and to our sponsors for helping us to do that. But because it's free, perhaps for those of you that feel that you're able to do so, I know how much the Playhouse would appreciate it, because obviously it's a really tricky time for them. So we'll just leave that on screen for a couple more seconds. I should say that text is only available on UK networks and will cost your donation amount plus one standard rate message. Okay, so thank you very much for anybody that feels that they're able to do that. Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of things then. We talked at the start about potentially being able to give away a couple of tickets. We were hoping originally that would be for the performance. It was going to be press night of the Christmas Carol. The Playhouse have very kindly agreed that we can still give away a couple of tickets. It's just for a future performance, and obviously that's subject to availability. What we'll do is we'll get in touch with the lucky recipient, and we'll make arrangements for that. So in order to make that happen, this is where hopefully everything's going to go fine. I've got a random number generator, and this is just to prove that everything's being done live and there's no fixes involved. So you can probably see there we've got a random number generator, and it goes from between 1 and 208, which are the number of people that signed up for the event. And I'm going to press that button now. There we go, and that number is number 137. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Q&A, and at the end of the Q&A, I will have worked out who is number 137 on our list, and then we can tell you who's won those. So thank you for that. So let's go into a Q&A then, and I'll read some questions out, and then we'll hand over to various members of the team tonight. So, starting from the top, there was a question about acoustic design. Answered in the chat, and obviously the building was set up, for the purpose as it was before. So there wasn't a major acoustic redesign. It's primarily for speech. We tried to address a couple of spots in the quarry where audibility was known to be an issue. So I just thought I'd answer that using the chat that's already been provided. There is a question about. It says any energy refit, but I suppose that's a wider question, presumably about the impacts that you've had in terms of environmental performance. I think you did touch on that, Nicola, didn't you, in your wrap up there?
Yes, I did. And in terms of a sustainability strategy, the kind of main priorities that we identified were using natural ventilation or heat recovery, mechanical vent where possible, seeking to gain maximum benefit from just replacing old kit and controls, because obviously even though the building only opened in 1990, you know, most of the MEP services were at the end of their natural life. Certainly the new extension, we had a high performance building envelope, and also, you know, hand in hand with the physical changes that we make. Obviously it's partly down to the operational changes as well, and staff and things understanding the systems that they're given. But yeah, and I think I mentioned, you know, specifically this connection to the district heating system made a fundamental difference. We worked with Max Fordham's, who are MEP engineers, on this, and I think what we determined quite quickly was that using a system such as BRIAM to shape the sustainability strategy would be a little counterproductive, and we might end up doing a lot of stuff as a bit of a tick box exercise. So Max Fordham's sustainability team kind of developed their own matrix, and that we kind of worked through. Unfortunately, obviously, with the year that we've all had, in terms of POE and things, you know, I think this year is such a unique year in terms of gathering data and being able to check and test how it's actually performed against what we anticipated is going to be quite tricky, and I think we might have to extend that period. I don't know, Eamon or David, whether you want to come in and add anything else on that.
Yeah, that question's actually been answered in the chat as well, but it's worth noting that with the connection to the district heating network, the existing gas boilers were replaced, which is a fairly significant contribution to the carbon reduction. But yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Okay, a couple of questions. One says, any challenges during the design process? I guess there were probably a number of challenges, but was there anything that perhaps, I guess to rephrase that, was there anything that changed as you went through the process? Did you start from one position and end somewhere else that was unexpected?
I think in terms of the strategic moves, we kind of at interview stage, we went along and said, yes, you want to build an extension, but actually, yeah, we should look at the ways of making more radical alteration internally to open things up. And kind of, obviously, it was an iterative process, and the form of the extension and things kind of took a few goes, I think, to get it right, but nothing fundamentally changed. I don't think. Eamon, can you remember any kind of major changes?
Well, we did come up against the usual kind of pressures with against the project budget as we went, you know, but I think, yeah, as Nicola said, that we tried to protect that key fundamental move, which was driving our new link through the mid-level, to connect everything. We thought that was a fundamental thing to protect. But in terms of design challenges, it was a very collaborative and evolving process down to ceramics. You know, the colour came later on when we kind of did more exploration into that, you know, and the kind of exuberant colour schemes that Bermontoft's employed, you know, so it was a bit of a leap of faith for us as well as the Playhouse for that, to kind of develop and explore ideas in that, and you know, it was quite exciting and involved. But in terms of challenges, no more than the usual. I think we discovered some surfaces in the existing courtyard area that we didn't expect, where we had to dig out for the right seating, for the new seating, and
we also discovered dead bodies in an old burial ground as we started to put down the steel work and the foundations for the new extension, which was yeah, I guess a kind of challenge that you don't normally.
Wow, yeah.
I think it was probably quite a lot in kind of the local press and stuff, and I think it was kind of talked about. But yeah, that was a kind of an unusual one, which you don't normally get in kind of every project. But yeah, that's
because it was a previously developed site area as well, so it wasn't expected.
That is unexpected. Yeah, absolutely. Gosh. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much. Just going back into the questions, I might roll a couple into one. One is about planning issues. If you had any sort of hurdles that you had to overcome with Leeds planning, and also there is a question I think I saw earlier on, which was about the existing building, and were there any conversations about the exterior of the existing building? Obviously, there's the very distinct sort of extensions that you've added on, but was there a deliberate decision to make the building as it was still recognisable?
Who wants to take that answer? Shall I?
Yeah.
Well, I think the easy answer to both those questions is planning. The planning process was relatively smooth. As always, we engaged as early as possible with the planners and had a kind of fruitful discussion with them. I would say they did push us on, but it was more on some of little details, like flashing details and things, because they were worried about over time the potential of staining on some of the precast panels. But it was a very positive, I would say, dialogue that we had with them all the way through. In terms of changing the look of the existing building, I think, had the budget been bigger, we maybe would have thought about it. But the honest answer is we had to be really careful about where we attributed best value, I think, in terms of meeting the project's objectives.
Great, thank you very much. There is a question about post-occupancy evaluation. Will you be able to measure the performance of the building against the RIBA climate challenge metrics when fully open, which is hopefully as soon as possible? I think Eamon's answered that already, and hopefully the intention is yes, to assess the performance along with Max Fordham's once the building is reopened fully. And as I think was touched on earlier, obviously, any sort of post-occupancy evaluation, the last few months haven't been typical, have they? So hopefully that process can begin soon. Just running through the Q&A now, and we've picked up on most things. There is one more question about hydraulic mechanisms in the substage interacting in the performance spaces. Anyone?
I seem to recall there's quite an unusual mechanism on the quarry theatre stage, and our theatre consultant from Charcoal Blue would be much better able to answer this question, but we didn't fundamentally change that too much from what I remember, but I might be talking out of turn here. So Eamon, could you remember?
No, I believe you're correct.
It's
mainly the existing substage lift, although our design relative to that was kind of additional temporary seating bank at that area. So that was the limitation of our involvement with that.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll just do a couple more then before we wrap up. And this is, I suppose, this is picking up on what we've just talked about in terms of new building versus old building. We've got a question from Martin Hamilton from the Civic Trust. Hi, Martin. And it talks, I think, we have already picked up on this. Some of the Leeds look was disguised, but not all. And well, how did you approach that balance? And do you think you've achieved a kind of cohesion between the two?
Eamon, do you want to respond? Or?
In terms of balance with the original building, we did open a dialogue with the original architect quite early on, Ian Appleton, and kind of discuss our approach, and we're not stepping his toes in terms of design. In terms of, I think I kind of referred that to him in part of the tour. There was a kind of desire to kind of leave remnants of the existing building in place, like the original lettering around the kind of ring beam at the entrance. But yeah, you know, we kind of tried to make a consistency with our approach in terms of materiality on the external, you know, and kind of tie in the key elements, you know, so that it was quite obvious where we made the interventions and where they sat relative to the existing building. And I'm quite happy to leave certain parts of that story kind of where they were, you know, in terms of like the fly tower and the lettering at high level. So.
Great, thank you. I've just seen an answer come in relating to substage mechanics that says nothing new was added. This is from David Bidus. There was an adjustment. Is that go on, Nicola? Sorry, you go.
No, just to explain, David Bidus was our client advisor, worked with us very closely.
Sure. We've had a couple
instrumental to the delivery of the project.
Sure, so, I have to say there are some answers by David here that clearly have a bit of insider knowledge. So that's really useful. Thank you, David, for helping us out there. There was an adjustment to the 4-stage lifts in the quarry to enable additional seats to be put at the front of the auditorium. There we go. So that answers that question. Okay, I think we will wrap it up there if that's okay. So obviously a massive thank you to everybody for supporting us by attending. Thank you to Page Park. Thank you to the Playhouse. So I would just like to say that I've worked out number 137 on the attendee list. And just to sort of prove that I've got it here, we've got Isabella Orgadan, who is a student. So we'll find out your details, Isabella, and we'll be in touch to arrange those tickets. So congratulations for that. I would just like to say as well that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a feedback form. We really hope that you've all enjoyed the tour. If you have feedback on how things have gone, then we'd be really grateful if you could fill that in. That form is available on the Q&A as Claire has put on there. So if you feel that you've got a couple of minutes after this to respond to that, we'd be really grateful. And I think that's about it. So yeah, look out for details of the model online and of the event online. We're hoping that the Playhouse might have a use for the model after this event, which would be really delighted if that is the case. Potentially as an accessibility aid to allow for people to see the building and to almost do a dry run for getting in and around the building before they actually visit. So we're really proud that as well as the event tonight, hopefully this project can continue into the future and its life will be a little longer. So hopefully we can share details of that soon. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and do look out for future events by the LSA soon. If anybody does want to find out more about the Leeds Society of Architects and what we do, then what I'd probably suggest is if you go to our social media, so if you go to Twitter or to Instagram and drop us a message through that, then we'd be very happy to sign you up and to involve you in future events. So a final thank you to Page Park for their brilliant presentation. Thank you to Cloud9 for the 3D scanning. Thank you for Darwin and Tavala for sponsoring the event. Thank you to the RIBA, and a massive thank you to the Playhouse for allowing us inside the building virtually, and hopefully you can all check it out for real again once it opens very soon. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers.